Episode 78. Snape stood there, seething, staring from Fudge, who looked thoroughly shocked at his behavior, to Dumbledore, whose eyes were twinkling behind his glasses. Snape whirled around, robes swishing behind him, and stormed out of the ward. "Fellow seems quite unbalanced," said Fudge, staring after him. "I'd watch out for him if I were you, Dumbledore." "Oh, he's not unbalanced," said Dumbledore quietly. "He's just suffered a severe disappointment." "He's not the only one," puffed Fudge. "The Daily Prophet's going to have a field day. We had Black Cornered and he slipped through our fingers again. All it needs now is for the story of that hippogriff's escape to get out, and I'll be a laughingstock. Well, I'd better go and notify the ministry." "And the Dementors," said Dumbledore. "They'll be removed from the school, I trust." "Oh, yes, they'll have to go," said Fudge, running his fingers distractedly through his hair. "Never dreamed they'd attempt to administer the kiss on an innocent boy. Completely out of control. Now I'll have them packed off back to Azkaban tonight. Perhaps we should think about dragons at the school entrance." "Hagrid would like that," said Dumbledore, smiling at Harry and Hermione. As he and Fudge left the dormitory, Madame Pomfrey hurried to the door and locked it again. Muttering angrily to herself, she headed back to her office. There was a low moan from the other end of the ward. Ron had woken up. They could see him sitting up, rubbing his head, looking around. What happened?" he groaned. "Harry, why are we in here? Where's Sirius? Where's Lupin? What's going on?" Harry and Hermione looked at each other. "You explain," said Harry, helping himself to more chocolate. When Harry, Ron, and Hermione left the hospital wing at noon the next day, it was to find an almost deserted castle. The sweltering heat and the end of the exams meant that everyone was taking full advantage of another Hogsmeade visit. Neither Ron nor Hermione felt like going, however, so they and Harry wandered onto the grounds, still talking about the extraordinary events of the previous night, and wondering where Sirius and Buckbeak were now. Sitting near the lake, watching the giant squid waving its tentacles lazily above the water, Harry lost the thread of the conversation as he looked across to the opposite bank. The stag had galloped toward them from there just last night. A shadow fell across them, and they looked up to see a very bleary-eyed Hagrid, mopping his sweaty face with one of his tablecloth-sized handkerchiefs and beaming down at them.
"Now I shouldn't be feeling happy after what happened last night," he said. "I mean, Black escaping again and everything, but guess what?"
"What?" they said, pretending to look curious.
"Beaky! He escaped! He's free! Been celebrating all night."
"That's wonderful," said Hermione, giving Ron a reproving look because he looked as though he was close to laughing.
"Yeah, get to tied him up properly," said Hagrid,
gazing happily out over the grounds.
"I was worried this morning, mind. Thought he might have met Professor Lupin on the grounds, but Lupin says he never ate anything last night."
"What?" said Harry quickly.
"Blimey, haven't you heard?"
said Hagrid, his smile fading a little. He lowered his voice, even though there was nobody in sight.
Snape told all the Slytherins this morning. Thought everyone'd know by now. Professor Lupin's a werewolf, see? And he was loose on the grounds last night. He's packing now, of course."
"He's packing?" said Harry, alarmed. "Why?"
"Well, leaving, isn't he?" said Hagrid,
looking surprised that Harry had to ask.
"Resigned first thing this morning. Said he can't risk it happening again."
Harry scrambled to his feet. "I'm going to see him," he said to Ron and Hermione.
"But if he's resigned, Doesn't sound like there's anything we can do.
I don't care. I still want to see him. I'll meet you back here. Lupin's office door was open. He had already packed most of his things. The Grindylows' empty tank stood next to his battered old suitcase, which was open and nearly full. Lupin was bending over something on his desk and looked up only when Harry knocked on the door.
"I saw you coming,"
said Lupin, smiling. He pointed to the parchment he had been poring over. It was the Marauder's map. "I just saw Hagrid," said Harry, "and he said you'd resigned. It's not true, is it?"
"I'm afraid it is,"
said Lupin. He started opening his desk drawers and taking out the contents. "Why?" said Harry. "The Ministry of Magic don't think you were helping Sirius, do they?" Lupin crossed to the door and closed it behind Harry.
"No. Professor Dumbledore managed to convince Fudge that I was trying to save your lives," he sighed. "That was the final straw for Severus. I think the loss of the Order of Merlin hit him hard, so he accidentally let slip that I am a werewolf this morning at breakfast."
"Well, you're not leaving just because of that," said Harry. Lupin smiled wryly.
"This time tomorrow the owls will start arriving from parents. They will not want a werewolf teaching their children, Harry. And after last night I see their point. I could have bitten any of you. That must never happen again."
"You're the best defense against the dark arts teacher we've ever had," said Harry. "Don't go." Lupin shook his head and didn't speak. He carried on emptying his drawers. Then, while Harry was trying to think of a good argument to make him stay, Lupin said,
"From what the headmaster told me this morning, you saved a lot of lives last night, Harry. If I'm proud of anything I've done this year, it's how much you've learned. Tell me about your Patronus."
"How'd you know about that?" said Harry, distracted.
"Well, what else could have driven the Dementors back?"
Harry told Lupin what had happened. When he'd finished, Lupin was smiling again.
"Yes, your father was always a stag when he transformed," he said. "You guessed right. That's why we called him Prongs."
Lupin threw his last few books into his suitcase, closed the desk drawers, and turned to look at Harry.
"Here, I brought this from the Shrieking Shack last night," he said,
handing Harry back the invisibility cloak.
"And—"
he hesitated, then held out the Marauder's map too.
"I am no longer your teacher, so I don't feel guilty about giving you back this as well. It's no use to me, and I dare say you, Ron, and Hermione will find uses for it."
Harry took the map and grinned. "You told me Moony, Wormtail, Padfoot, and Prongs would have wanted to lure me out of school. You said they'd have thought it was funny."
"And so we would have,"
said Lupin, now reaching down to close his case.
"I have no hesitation in saying that James would have been highly disappointed if his son had never found any of the secret passages out of the castle."
There was a knock on the door. Harry hastily stuffed the Marauder's map and the invisibility cloak into his pocket. It was Professor Dumbledore. He didn't look surprised to see Harry there. "Your carriage is at the gates, Remus," he said.
"Thank you, Headmaster."
Lupin picked up his old suitcase and the empty Grindylow tank.
"Well, goodbye, Harry," he said, smiling. "It has been a real pleasure teaching you. I feel sure we'll meet again sometime. Headmaster, there is no need to see me to the gates. I can manage."
Harry had the impression that Lupin wanted to leave as quickly as possible. "Goodbye, then, Remus," said Dumbledore soberly. Lupin shifted the Grindylow tank slightly so that he and Dumbledore could shake hands. Then, with a final nod to Harry and a swift smile, Lupin left the office. Harry sat down in his vacated chair, staring glumly at the floor. He heard the door close and looked up. Dumbledore was still there. "Why so miserable, Harry?" he said quietly. "You should be very proud of yourself after last night."